I've been a mail carrier for 35 years, walking the same route through Riverside Heights since 1989. What I discovered about Harold Whitman at 1847 Maple Avenue still haunts me every time I pass that house. This isn't just about strange deliveries or odd behavior. This is about 40 years of calculated psychological terror that nobody saw coming. It started innocently enough. Mrs. Chin at 1845 Maple Avenue began calling our office in late September about packages appearing on her doorstep. Not delivered packages, just old, wrapped boxes that seemed to materialize overnight. Her English wasn't perfect, but her distress was clear. She'd find them every few weeks, always in the same spot, always carefully wrapped in yellowed paper and twine. The first time I investigated, I found her standing in her doorway, pointing at a small rectangular package. The wrapping looked ancient, the kind of brown paper and string you'd see in old photographs. Inside was a vintage toy soldier, maybe from the 1950s, with chipped paint and a missing arm. Mrs. Chin insisted she'd never seen it before. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "Who brings these things?" I assumed it was neighborhood kids playing pranks, but something felt off. The care taken in wrapping each item, the consistent timing, the fact that it only happened to Mrs. Chin, it suggested a different kind of intent. Over the following months, the deliveries became more frequent. Always toys, always vintage, always slightly damaged. A wooden puppet with tangled strings. A porcelain doll with a cracked face. A tin robot with rusted joints. Each one wrapped with the same meticulous attention, placed in the exact same spot on her doorstep. Mrs. Chin began documenting everything. She'd photograph each package before opening it, keeping detailed records of dates and contents. Her fear was palpable. She'd installed motion sensor lights and started checking her peephole obsessively throughout the night. The real breakthrough came in March 1990. I was running late on my route when I noticed Harold Whitman, her immediate neighbor, working in his front yard. He was maybe 60 then, a retired machinist who lived alone since his wife passed in 1986. Always polite, always kept to himself. But something in his posture that day caught my attention, the way he kept glancing toward Mrs. Chen's house while pretending to tend his garden. I started paying closer attention to the timing. The packages always appeared on days when Mrs. Chen worked late at the textile factory. They were always discovered the next morning, meaning someone was placing them under cover of darkness. The more I observed, the more I noticed Harold's subtle surveillance of her schedule. One evening in May, I decided to conduct my own surveillance. I parked across the street around 11 p.m., with a clear view of both properties. Harold's house was dark except for a single light in what appeared to be a basement window. Around 1:30 a.m. I saw movement. Harold emerged from his back door, moving slowly but deliberately. He was carrying something, a small package wrapped in that familiar brown paper. I watched him approach Mrs. Chen's front door, place the package carefully on her doorstep, and retreat to his own property. The entire operation took less than 3 minutes. But here's what made my blood run cold. His movements were too practiced, too routine. This wasn't recent behavior. This was someone who'd perfected a ritual through years of repetition. The next morning, I confronted Harold directly. I knocked on his door, and when he answered, I could see past him into his living room. The walls were lined with glass display cases filled with vintage toys, hundreds of them, all arranged with obsessive precision. Toy soldiers, dolls, mechanical figures, all from decades past. "Mr. Whitman," I said, "I think we need to discuss the packages you've been leaving for Mrs. Chen." His reaction was immediate and disturbing. No denial, no surprise, just a slow, knowing smile that seemed to acknowledge that his secret had finally been discovered. "She appreciates them," he said simply. "I've been sharing my collection with neighbors for 40 years. Mrs. Chin is just the latest to receive my gifts." 40 years. The weight of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I thought about the previous residents of 1845 Maple Avenue, the elderly couple who'd moved to a nursing home in 1987, the young family before them who'd relocated suddenly in 1982. "The other neighbors," I pressed. "What happened to them?" Harold's smile widened. They all moved away eventually. People don't appreciate craftsmanship anymore. But I kept offering my gifts, hoping someone would understand their value. I later learned the full scope of Harold's gift-giving. Through property records and conversations with longtime residents, I discovered he'd been terrorizing neighbors with his unwanted deliveries since 1950. Each household that received his packages eventually moved away, driven by the psychological pressure of unwanted intrusions and the violation of their personal space. The toys themselves revealed the disturbing pattern. Harold had been collecting damaged vintage toys for decades, not to repair them, but to share their broken state with others. Each delivery was a calculated act of psychological intimidation, designed to create fear and unease in his targets' daily lives. Mrs. Chen's case was particularly disturbing because Harold had escalated his behavior. Previous neighbors reported packages appearing monthly or quarterly. With Mrs. Chen, deliveries were occurring weekly, sometimes twice per week. The increasing frequency suggested an intensification of his obsession. When police searched Harold's house, they found detailed records dating back to 1950. He'd kept meticulous notes about each neighbor's schedule, their reactions to his deliveries, and the eventual dates when they moved away. The basement contained over 3,000 vintage toys, all in various states of disrepair, all carefully catalogued and organized. The psychological evaluation revealed Harold's methodology. He identified vulnerable targets, elderly residents, single women, families with young children, and began his campaign of intimidation. The toys were chosen specifically for their unsettling appearance: damaged faces, missing limbs, broken mechanisms. Each delivery was designed to create maximum psychological impact. Harold died in custody before trial, but his records painted a picture of 4 decades of systematic terror. Over 60 families had been driven from their homes by his unwanted gifts. The true tragedy was that nobody had connected the pattern until 1990. Harold had been operating across different neighborhoods, ensuring that no single community would recognize the scope of his activities. Mrs. Chen eventually moved away, despite Harold's death. The psychological damage was too severe. She told me that even months later, she'd find herself checking her doorstep compulsively, expecting to find another package waiting. The house at 1847 Maple Avenue remains empty. New families tour it regularly, attracted by the below-market price, but something in the atmosphere seems to deter long-term residents. The current owners have had 3 different tenants in the past 5 years, and none have stayed longer than 6 months. I still walk that route every day, and I still think about Harold's collection. 40 years of terrorizing his neighbors, and he genuinely believed he was sharing something precious with them. The disconnect between his perception and reality represents a level of psychological disturbance that still disturbs me. What bothers me most is wondering how many other Harold Whitmans are out there, conducting their own campaigns of intimidation under the guise of neighborly behavior. How many packages appear on doorsteps without explanation? How many residents move away without ever understanding why they felt unsafe in their own homes? Have you ever received unexpected packages or gifts from neighbors? Have you noticed patterns in your community that made you question someone's true intentions? Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who present themselves as harmless, hiding their calculated behavior behind a mask of eccentric generosity. I've been a state trooper for 20 years, working Highway 99 through the Central Valley. What happened during my shift on November 14, 2021, still makes me question how well we really know the people we love. Sometimes the most dangerous pursuit isn't a criminal running from justice. It's love twisted into something unrecognizable. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. Brookfield State Hospital reported a missing patient, high-risk psychiatric hold who'd somehow bypassed 3 security checkpoints and disappeared into the night. The patient was Diana Carver, 34, committed 6 months earlier for severe delusional episodes and violent behavior toward her estranged husband. Diana had been involuntarily committed after attempting to break into her husband's apartment with a crowbar, claiming he was being held captive by imposters. The delusion was specific and persistent. She believed her husband Mark had been replaced by someone identical, and her real husband was being held prisoner somewhere. No amount of evidence could convince her otherwise. I was patrolling near Clearwater when dispatch updated us with Diana's likely destination. Mark Carver had relocated to Fairfield after the restraining order, trying to rebuild his life away from Diana's increasingly erratic behavior. Hospital staff found notes in her room indicating she'd somehow discovered his new address. What made this case particularly urgent was Diana's history. Before her commitment, she'd escalated from following Mark to work, to breaking into his apartment, to eventually attempting to rescue him by force. She'd been found in his bedroom at 3 a.m., standing over his sleeping form with a kitchen knife, muttering about freeing him from the imposters. I reached Mark's apartment complex in Fairfield around 4:15 a.m. The building was a simple two-story structure with exterior staircases, easy access, limited security. Mark's unit was on the second floor, and I could see lights on in what appeared to be his living room. As I approached the building, I noticed a 2017 blue Honda Civic parked in the visitor section. The license plate matched Diana's vehicle description, but hospital staff had confirmed her car was still in their parking lot. I ran the plates and discovered the Honda was registered to Diana's sister in Modesto. She'd somehow acquired alternate transportation. The apartment manager met me at the entrance, clearly shaken. "She's been out there for hours," he whispered. "Just sitting on the staircase, staring at his door." When I approached her, she told me she was waiting for visiting hours to begin. Through the second-floor window, I could see Diana sitting on the metal staircase leading to Mark's apartment. She appeared calm, almost serene, dressed in civilian clothes instead of hospital attire. Her posture suggested she'd been there for some time, patiently waiting like this was a normal social visit. I contacted Mark before approaching Diana. His voice was hollow when he answered, the exhaustion of months of fear evident even through the phone. "She's out there again, isn't she?" he said. "I saw her around midnight. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but she's really there." Mark explained that Diana had been sitting on his staircase for over 4 hours, occasionally standing to peer through his windows, then returning to her patient vigil. She hadn't attempted to break in or cause any disturbance. She was simply waiting, as if her presence alone would somehow solve whatever problem she believed existed. When I approached Diana, her reaction was disturbingly normal. She smiled and stood politely, as if greeting an expected visitor. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she said. "I've been trying to report a kidnapping, but nobody will listen to me. My husband is being held in that apartment by someone who looks exactly like him." Her conviction was absolute. Diana explained that the real Mark had a small scar on his left hand from a childhood accident, but the imposter, Mark, didn't have that scar. She'd been observing him for months, documenting differences in his behavior, his speech patterns, even his sleeping habits. "The fake Mark sleeps on the wrong side of the bed," she continued. "He drinks his coffee black now instead of with cream. He doesn't laugh at my jokes anymore. Obviously, he's not the same person." The tragic reality was that Diana's observations were partially accurate. Mark had changed, but not because he'd been replaced. 6 months of restraining orders, therapy sessions, and fear had naturally altered his behavior. He'd stopped drinking coffee with cream because it reminded him of their breakfast routine. He'd changed his sleep position because he'd developed insomnia from anxiety. He didn't laugh at her jokes because he was terrified of her. But in Diana's mind, these changes were evidence of an elaborate conspiracy rather than the natural consequence of their relationship's deterioration. During the 40-minute conversation before backup arrived, Diana revealed the full scope of her surveillance. She'd been tracking Mark's daily routine through social media, public records, and careful observation. She knew his work schedule, his grocery shopping patterns, even his new girlfriend's visiting schedule. "I've been protecting him," she explained. "The imposters don't know I'm watching. When the time is right, I'll rescue the real Mark, and we can go back to being happy together." The most disturbing aspect was Diana's patience. She'd been planning this, rescue for months, studying security protocols at the hospital, arranging for her sister's car, timing her escape for maximum effect. This wasn't an impulsive act, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign based on a completely false premise. When we finally arrested Diana, she remained convinced that we were part of the conspiracy. She calmly explained that law enforcement had obviously been compromised, and she needed to find another way to save Mark. The psychiatric evaluation revealed that Diana's delusions had actually intensified during her hospital stay. Rather than providing treatment, the controlled environment had given her time to elaborate her fantasy into an increasingly complex conspiracy theory. She'd convinced herself that her commitment was part of the plot to keep her separated from her real husband. Mark eventually relocated again, this time to a different state. He changed his name and cut contact with mutual friends who might inadvertently reveal his location. The last I heard, he was considering plastic surgery to alter his appearance, terrified that Diana would eventually be released and resume her pursuit. Diana remains in state custody, but her delusions persist. She continues to believe that Mark is being held prisoner somewhere, and that her rescue mission was interrupted by corrupt authorities. Her case file indicates she spends most of her time planning new escape attempts and surveillance strategies. The truly horrifying aspect is that Diana's behavior stemmed from genuine love, but love so distorted by mental illness that it became indistinguishable from stalking. She genuinely believed she was protecting her husband, even while terrorizing him. The line between devotion and obsession had been obliterated by psychological dysfunction. This case changed how I view domestic situations. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger breaking into your home, it's someone who knows your habits, your weaknesses, and your schedule. Someone who believes their actions are justified by love, no matter how twisted that love has become. Have you ever noticed someone monitoring your routine too closely? Have you experienced the kind of attention that feels more like surveillance than affection? Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones we should fear most, especially when their version of love requires us to be someone we're not. I've been a night manager at McDonald's on Industrial Boulevard in Stockton for 12 years. What I discovered about our regular customer, Kevin Morrison, still makes me check the security cameras obsessively. This isn't about someone who just liked our food. This was a predator who turned our restaurant into his personal hunting ground. Kevin started coming in around October 2019, always during the dinner rush between 6 to 8 p.m. Mid-30s, average height, drove a gray 2016 Toyota Camry with California plates. He'd order the same thing every time, quarter-pounder meal, no pickles, large Coke, and always sat in the same booth facing the counter. At first, he seemed like any other regular. Polite, quiet, never caused problems. But I started noticing his behavior patterns. Kevin wasn't there for the food, he was studying our female customers. He'd barely touch his meal, instead watching women order, tracking their movements, memorizing their routines. The first incident I witnessed was in December 2019. A young woman in scrubs, clearly a healthcare worker grabbing dinner after her shift, was waiting for her order when Kevin approached her. His opening line was always the same. "Excuse me, you look familiar. Do you work around here?" What made it disturbing was his preparation. I'd watched him observe this woman for 3 previous visits, learning her schedule, her usual order, even which parking spot she preferred. When he finally approached her, it wasn't random, it was calculated. The woman politely deflected his conversation, but Kevin persisted. He mentioned specific details about her routine. "I think I've seen you here Tuesday nights before. And you always get the chicken nuggets, right?" These weren't casual observations. They were proof of surveillance. Over the following months, I documented Kevin's pattern. He'd select a target, observe her for 2 to 3 visits to learn her schedule, then initiate contact using information gathered through his surveillance. He never approached the same woman twice, always moving to new targets once his initial attempt failed. Kevin's selection criteria became clear through observation. He targeted women who appeared to be alone, typically between 20 to 35 years old, often in work uniforms suggesting regular employment schedules. Healthcare workers, retail employees, office staff, women whose routines were predictable and whose professional appearance suggested stability. The breakthrough came in March 2020. Sarah Martinez, a bank teller who worked nearby, started visiting our location regularly around 7:30 p.m. Kevin immediately identified her as a potential target, beginning his observation phase. But Sarah was more observant than his previous targets. After Kevin's third visit during her usual time, Sarah approached me directly. "That man in the corner booth," she said. "He's been watching me for weeks. Tonight he took pictures of me with his phone." I checked our security footage and confirmed her suspicions. Kevin had been photographing Sarah discreetly, using his phone's camera while pretending to scroll through social media. The images appeared to capture her face, her vehicle, even her license plate number through the window. When I confronted Kevin about the photography, his reaction was immediate and telling. No denial, no surprise, just a calm explanation that he was trying to remember faces. Because he had memory problems. He voluntarily showed me his phone, revealing dozens of photos of different women, all taken inside our restaurant over several months. The photos revealed the true scope of Kevin's operation. He'd been documenting women's faces, their vehicles, their license plates, and their schedules. Each photo was meticulously organized by date and time, creating a database of potential targets and their routines. I immediately contacted Stockton police, who launched an investigation into Kevin's activities. What they discovered was a systematic stalking operation that extended far beyond our restaurant. Kevin had been visiting multiple fast food locations throughout the Central Valley, using the same methodology to identify and track women. Police found Kevin's apartment filled with detailed surveillance records. He'd created profiles for over 200 women, documenting their work schedules, home addresses, family information, and daily routines. The investigation revealed he'd been following women home, learning their neighborhoods, identifying their vulnerabilities. Kevin's computer contained search histories showing extensive research into identity theft, home security systems, and surveillance equipment. He'd been purchasing items that suggested escalation, telephoto lenses, GPS tracking devices, lockpicking tools. His stalking was evolving from observation to preparation for physical intrusion. The psychological evaluation revealed Kevin's methodology was specifically designed to appear normal. By approaching women in public places during routine activities, he could claim his interest was romantic rather than predatory. The restaurant setting provided cover for his surveillance while allowing him to gather intelligence under the guise of casual observation. Kevin had been refining his approach through trial and error. Early targets reported him as overly aggressive or obviously inappropriate. By 2020, he perfected a technique that appeared friendly and spontaneous while actually being based on weeks of surveillance and preparation. During the investigation, 17 women came forward to report encounters with Kevin. Each described similar experiences: a seemingly chance meeting that felt uncomfortably informed, a man who knew details about their routines that he shouldn't have known, persistent contact attempts despite clear rejection. Kevin was ultimately sentenced to 4 years for stalking and harassment, but the damage was extensive. Several victims relocated to different cities, changed their daily routines, or left jobs because they no longer felt safe in their normal environments. The psychological impact of discovering they'd been surveilled for months created lasting trauma. Our restaurant implemented new security protocols after Kevin's arrest. We installed additional cameras, trained staff to recognize surveillance behavior, and established procedures for reporting suspicious customers. But the experience fundamentally changed how we view regular customers. The most disturbing aspect was Kevin's patience. He'd spend months studying a single target, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make contact. His approach was methodical, professional, and completely invisible to casual observation. Kevin's case highlighted how predators exploit routine social spaces. Places like restaurants, coffee shops, and retail locations become hunting grounds because they provide legitimate reasons to be present while observing potential victims. The social expectation of friendliness in these environments provides cover for inappropriate behavior. Have you ever noticed someone paying too much attention to your routine? Have you experienced conversations where strangers seem to know more about your schedule than they should? Sometimes the person who seems to, coincidentally, show up in your daily life isn't there by accident. They're there because they've been watching, learning, and planning. I've been a police detective in Hillcrest for 19 years, specializing in burglary and breaking and entering cases. What I discovered at 2134 Willow Court in January 2022 redefined everything I thought I knew about home invasion. This wasn't about someone breaking in to steal. This was about someone moving in to stay. The call came from Janet Rodriguez, a registered nurse who'd been living alone in her modest two-bedroom house since her divorce in 2019. She'd been hearing sounds from her basement for 3 weeks: footsteps, running water, even what sounded like television programming late at night. "Detective, I know this sounds crazy," Janet said when I arrived, "but I think someone's been living in my basement. I've been too scared to check myself." Janet's house was a 1970s ranch-style home with an unfinished basement she rarely used for anything beyond storage. The basement had its own exterior entrance through bulkhead doors, but Janet had always kept them locked. She'd assumed the sounds were pipes settling or neighborhood noise traveling through the foundation. When we descended into the basement, I immediately noticed the organized living space that had been created in the far corner. Someone had arranged furniture, a mattress, folding chair, small table, and battery-powered radio. They'd even hung a curtain for privacy, creating a makeshift bedroom behind the water heater. The setup was sophisticated. The intruder had tapped into Janet's electrical system, running extension cords to power a small heater and reading lamp. They'd connected a garden hose to the basement's utility sink for water access. Food supplies were stored in coolers and plastic containers, suggesting long-term occupancy. Most disturbing was the evidence of surveillance. The intruder had been monitoring Janet's daily routine from inside her own home. Written schedules documented her work shifts, exercise classes, grocery shopping trips, and social activities. They knew Janet's schedule better than she did. Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera revealed the intruder's identity: Rebecca Walsh, a 29-year-old woman who'd been evicted from her apartment 6 months earlier. Rebecca had been entering through the bulkhead doors, which she'd learned to unlock using lock-picking tools found among her possessions. Rebecca had been living in Janet's basement for approximately 2 months. She'd been coming and going during Janet's work hours, showering in the basement utility area, and even doing laundry in Janet's washer and dryer while Janet was away. The operation required detailed knowledge of Janet's schedule and careful timing to avoid detection. When we arrested Rebecca, she showed no remorse or embarrassment about her living situation. She calmly explained that she'd been house-sitting, and that Janet wouldn't mind if she'd asked permission. Rebecca genuinely seemed to believe she'd been providing a service by occupying unused space. The psychological evaluation revealed Rebecca's methodology. She'd been scouting single-family homes with basement access, looking for properties where owners appeared to have predictable schedules. Janet's house was ideal: isolated basement entrance, absent during work hours, minimal use of basement space. Rebecca had been observing Janet's routine for weeks before moving in. She'd followed Janet to work, timed her errands, and even researched her social media to understand her lifestyle. The surveillance was so thorough that Rebecca knew Janet's exercise schedule, her dating patterns, even her favorite restaurants. During the investigation, we discovered Rebecca had attempted this arrangement twice before. She'd been discovered in a basement in Woodland after 3 weeks, and briefly occupied a garage apartment in Davis before being evicted. Each time, she'd refined her approach, becoming more skilled at avoiding detection. Rebecca's possessions revealed the extent of her planning. She'd acquired lockpicking tools, studied electrical wiring, researched property records to identify optimal targets. Her approach was methodical and professional, treating home invasion as a housing strategy rather than a crime. The forensic analysis showed Rebecca had been accessing Janet's main living areas while Janet was away. Food had been consumed, personal items had been moved, and Rebecca had even used Janet's computer to research potential future housing targets. The violation of privacy extended far beyond the basement. Janet's reaction to the discovery was devastating. She'd been unknowingly sharing her home with a stranger for 2 months, completely unaware that her private space had been compromised. The psychological impact was severe. She no longer felt safe in her own home. Rebecca was sentenced to 18 months for breaking and entering, but the case highlighted a growing trend of sophisticated home invasion for housing purposes. Economic pressures had created a population of skilled intruders who view unoccupied spaces as potential residences rather than targets for theft. Janet eventually sold her house and moved to a secured apartment complex. She couldn't overcome the feeling that her home had been permanently violated. The knowledge that someone had been watching her, learning her habits, and living beneath her feet created lasting trauma. The case changed how I investigate burglary reports. Now, when homeowners report unusual sounds or evidence of intrusion, I always consider the possibility of extended occupancy rather than simple theft. The traditional break-in-and-leave model is evolving into break-in-and-stay scenarios. Rebecca's sophistication was particularly disturbing. She'd created a functional living space, established sustainable systems for utilities and water, and developed surveillance methods that allowed her to coexist with the homeowner for months. Her approach was more like a parasitic relationship than traditional criminal activity. Have you ever heard unexplained sounds in your home, especially in areas you rarely use? Have you noticed small changes in your living space that you couldn't explain? Sometimes the most dangerous intruder isn't someone who breaks in to steal your belongings. It's someone who breaks in to steal your space, your privacy, and your peace of mind. Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.